and we have based most of what we do, what I continue doing, of course, on the model that I quote as Wilber's model. I'm not so sure it is his, but in which he talks about the 4 quadrants, the it quadrant, the it's plural, the we quadrant, and the I quadrant, which I like to use very much in management, but starting with the we quadrant, the values quadrant. When I do a workshop with companies, I say, look, let's start discussing what is the value you would like to realize in your company. What are the values if you recruit a new person that they have to understand? And if they don't agree with those values, they might just not be at their place. Once you have decided or accepted about those values, then the whole issue is how do you translate that into the personal development path of basically everybody in the company? How am I going to contribute to that? How am I going to learn from that? How is it part of what I'm, as a person, I'm going to do in my personal development? If those two parts are dealt with, which of course often we don't do, and that's where we talk about managers and not about transformational leaders, then we can go to how do we organize the things, which I like to label as mechanistic management techniques. And then eventually, as I said earlier, automatically out of that follows systemic management approaches like sustainable development, ethics, social responsibility, etc. A transformational leader is one that follows that logic, from values to personal development, well-being, leadership, before getting to what do I then have to do daily. And I don't say that finance is important. I just say it is only one of the 4 quadrants of the Wilber model, and then eventually automatically follows the systemic management approach. And by the way, I found a poem.
Oh.
You want me to read it?
It would be great.
So it's a poem from Antonio Machado. And of course he wrote it in Spanish, but this is an English translation. Wonder your footprints are the path and nothing more. Wonder there is no path, it is created as you walk. By walking you make the path before you, and when you look behind you see the path which after you will not be trod again. Wonder there is no path, but the ripples on the waters.
That's a beautiful poem. And
it is.
It's really the vision for Euromed, for the program, is it not?
It is. It's not by accident. If you would go on the website of the school, you no doubt find somewhere the poem. I didn't pick it there, by the way. I could have done that. It is there. When I came to the school 5 years ago, in order to reconstruct this school in a more systemic way, I knew the poem already for long ago, but I've immediately said, this is it. I mean, if you want to say it in a few sentences, this really summarizes the whole idea. So as a student, you lay down the path in walking, and of course you need some structure, and of course we give a diploma. So at the end of the day, we need accreditations, and that means that you need to have structure. However, we need to have the freedom and the personal development orientation for the students so that they can lay each and every individual student their path by walking. And it works out reasonably well. Though we are a school with 3,500 students, it nevertheless works out reasonably well. And I think it is equally true for companies. If companies would take that poem, or at least the message of that poem, a little bit as their credo, I think you really would be able to start a transformation and a definite shift.
Part of my experience at Euromed in the seminar and getting to know your students very, 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 very briefly was that part of this is a question of just normal human development, psychological, emotional, spiritual, mental unfolding, and many of them being so young that they had never been asked many of these questions or asked them for themselves. And here they are then entering the business community where the corporation becomes sort of a mechanized mother that grows these human beings into a certain kind of person. And unless they have a real adherence or passion or need or calling to explore on this level, they might have a tendency to go along with the flow. So what you're saying is so radical to offer this in school, this kind of personal development, this nurturing, this encouragement to ask these questions that are rarely asked and are difficult to ask oneself, yet let alone to answer, as well as to encourage companies to play this more psychological, if perhaps even spiritual, but certainly ethical role in their employees' development.
Yeah. Oh, it is definitely radical. I agree with that, and therefore I didn't want to say that radical, but I think if we would get a part in that direction, we really might make a serious difference. That is for sure. I agree with you. Most of the students did never ask these questions, were never asked these questions, and that has to do with as you say, a lack of just personal interest, spiritual development. It is all very mechanistic. It's the modern times of Chaplin, and specifically in management. We have made that our credo in the Western world, say North America and Europe. And we continue doing that in business schools, and we continue building the wrong attitude. So therefore, I'm quite happy that I've been able, at least partly, I'm not going to exaggerate, we remain a business school, but I think there is a real place in the world for business schools that are maybe less business schools as they look like today, and much more oriented to the development of personalities, of managerial competencies, of interconnectedness, etc. And as far as my information goes, my knowledge goes, there aren't a lot. And I really honestly think there is a place for that.
So if a manager or a teacher of management would see all this, what would be some of the next steps for them?
Well, there are two possible groups, I would say. The one that say, oh gosh, what is all this about? And that they run very hard in the other direction. And unfortunately, there are still a number of them. Fortunately, there are some others that are interested. They want to talk about it. They are not against experimentation, but now I'm going to say something very down to earth. At the end of the day, even an academic should make an academic career, which means that it has to do with academic publications, which you often easier do in a mainstream journal than in a non-mainstream journal. So you have to be very courageous as a young employee in a company, very courageous as a young academic in a university to say, look, what I want to research is really the role of consciousness in management. There aren't a lot of structures that allow you to do that. So I think that it needs a lot of courage. And the same is true in companies. It needs a lot of courage of managers to say, look, we stop this whole search for financial performance. Not that finance is not important, but it's a consequence. It's not a purpose. It's not a value. But needless to say, it's enough to read any newspaper, not even the Wall Street papers, but you need any newspaper to see that this is not what is current practice today.
Yeah. I was thinking just that, something that you said just a few minutes ago about the courage that is needed to really follow one's conscience.
Mm-hmm.
We ask the students to inquire, to do this kind of self-inquiry, and they may have epiphanies and awakenings and emotions, feelings, new ideas come to mind, and then they return